really emphasizing and recommending that ISPs and eligible applicants get the pre-registration done well in advance of June 3rd. June 3rd is when round two opens, and the pre-registration process requires a lot of information, so we want to make sure everybody gets that done. So once the window opens for the application, folks can just focus on their application and be done with that part. We also have some webinars coming up for pre-registration and application guidance. And again, I'll put those links in the chat. There's, in fact, one today for tribes, and we'll have some next week. So starting today and next week and the week after, we've got several webinars that are coming, again, all offering guidance to prepare for that application and that pre-registration window.
No, I haven't seen it, Joe.
Michael?
I have not seen it.
And that's it for me.
Whoops. Excuse me just a second here. Let me, okay. Any questions for Kelly? If not, I'm just going to turn it over to Nick this morning.
We're targeting the 29th. No, later into the month.
Steve, could you give me permission to share? I'll share the screen for Nick.
Okay. And give me just a second. I want to.
Sure.
Michael. Okay. So you should have permission now to share.
I do. Thank you.
Okay. So Nick, you're on. Welcome again. Glad to have you here. And it's been, as we were talking earlier, it's an interesting time right now, and lots of stuff happening. So it'd be great to get a good perspective from you about where we are, and then any thoughts that you can or want to share about what's happening at the federal level these days. So with that,
absolutely,
I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Appreciate you, Steve, and thank you always for having us in the state broadband office. We really appreciate you putting this group together. A lot of great minds here, a lot of great networking. So we're glad to be a part of it and share our perspective and learn from others on the call as well.
Hey Nick, before I forget, I do want to just have a shout out to Aaron and to Kelly, that really appreciate that they're here pretty much every week, and really appreciate them sharing with us. I'm going to stop sharing.
Hopefully I don't say anything that contradicts anything that they've said in the last few times.
Okay, so now you're on, Nick.
Well, I do want to just underscore the importance of the digital equity program that Erin mentioned at the top here. Obviously, as she said, that the applications are open. So, anybody on this call who's eligible to apply or knows people or entities.
Whoops, sorry, I just muted you, and I will try to unmute you. Okay, why isn't this unmuting?
Okay.
There we go.
Does it work now? We're at. Okay. So we just encourage as many applications as possible for the important program. So thank you, Erin, for sharing that at the beginning. So obviously, I think you're all very familiar with the BEAD program and the ins and outs of it, but I just kind of wanted to give you an overview of where the state broadband office is at in administering it and the timeline, and kind of what some of the NTIA pending guidance could mean for the program. So I think you're pretty familiar with this visual here, but just as a reminder, we're right in between that yellow circle right here. So we're right. Round one is closed. So round one, just as a reminder, was our fiber priority application phase. So that closed officially on March 7th. So our team has been evaluating, scoring, validating, negotiating, and really just ensuring that all of the I's are dotted, the T's are crossed, and we're reading all of this data correctly. I mean, if anybody here was an applicant, they would know that this was a thoroughly robust application that required a lot of different data as a part of it. Mapping data, financial capacity, stakeholder engagement, letters of support. I mean, really anything under the sun that could make you show that you have the demonstration and capacity to build and be able to administer really just a high profile infrastructure program that has so much impact across the state. So we've been, over the last month and a half, close to 2 months, have been evaluating and scoring and negotiating all of these applications. Round 2 is set to open June 3rd. Right now we're committed to keeping that date, despite any NTIA guidance that could come. I'll just kind of say it here at the top. The state broadband office is committed to moving full steam ahead here. I don't think it would take, it's really not a partisan comment here to say that the BEAD program has taken longer than probably most people would have anticipated. From our public administrator role, we understand that we have a commitment to the state of Arizona and every single Arizonan to ensure that we're delivering high-speed internet as efficiently as we possibly can. We're not going to try to look in a magic crystal ball to see what this guidance could do for the BEAD program. We're committed to moving full steam ahead. I'll show you some data on the next slide here in a second, but we think that we ran a pretty darn good program and pretty darn good results from the first round. And we're confident that any type of guidance that can come out from NTIA in the coming weeks shouldn't inhibit the performance in the structure of the BEAD program that Arizona has created. So with that being said, we're going to be adaptable to any type of guidance that does come out, but we're confident that it's not going to have too much, or not create too much of a roadblock for us to keep going and administer the program. So again, this is all speculation, but we've heard mid-May for this guidance. Most recently, we've heard June or July. We don't have any insight on what is going to be in that guidance. I'm sure we all could have a guess and pull something together and share what that would be. And we could be right, we could be wrong. But, I think a lot of it's in flux. I think a lot of the decision-making is happening at the top level, from the secretary himself through the White House. So, we don't know what this guidance is going to look like, and we're not in the business of guessing it either. So, we have our guidelines, we have our commitments that is under the current BEAD program, and we have pretty strict timelines. So, if we wait a day or anything, we're risking being incompliant, and that's not something that we want to do. Like, we have the commitment to Arizona to make sure that we're doing this program as best as we possibly can. So a couple of weeks ago, obviously, when NTIA indicated that they are going to release this new guidance, they granted a blanket 90-day extension for all states. So where that puts us, excuse me, is roughly at an end of October deadline. We still need to confirm with NTIA what that date is. I think you kind of get the gist of where we're going here. But I think somewhere around Halloween, maybe a week before, is what we're prepared for. And like I said, obviously we want to move as quickly as we possibly can, but if NTIA is providing us more time to make sure that we're doing this properly and to adjust to any guidance, then we're going to take it. We understand that this is once in a generation funding. Despite it taking a long time to implement it, we want to be pretty methodical and pretty strategic in how we're doing this. So, for an extra 90 days to ensure that we're going to have a generation of infrastructure and really just a sustainable infrastructure in place, we're going to take it. So, that's our commitment. That's how we're reacting to NTA guidance. And that's really all we know either. This is, Steve, that's not one of the questions that I'm going to shy away from. Like, that's actually what we know right now from NTIA. But
so Nick, you may
yeah,
know that we've done a series of what we know, what we think we know, and what we don't know, and changes from day to day.
Yeah. But I'm happy to answer more questions on that. But we can go to we only have one more slide here, and I can kind of just give you an insight on what round one looked like. Okay. So left side here. So here's just the overview of the BEAD program. So, we created 67 project areas. I think you're familiar with that by now. 21 tribal project areas, respecting the sovereignty of tribal lands. So each tribal land had their own project areas, and we divided the 15 counties into 46 project areas. Each county could have a range between 1 and 5 different project areas. A lot of it depended on cost quest data and locations that are available. We ran a pretty robust market sounding process, and that reassured us that we're moving forward in the right way in drafting the project areas. And I think the results that I'll talk about here in a second will demonstrate that. Our goal right there is the BEAD eligible locations, so 192,000 locations that we're looking to serve here with BEAD. 8,000 of those are community anchor institutions, so it's about 184,000 households in the state. Okay, so priority applications here. So you probably saw our 147 application number. So that number is true, but I wanted to, for this group, dive in a little bit more on what that means. So we looked at each project area individually, and we'll score each project area individually. Now, an applicant can submit up to 3 applications per project area as a part of their package. So our priority for the BEAD program and for the entire state outside of the BEAD program is fiber. We think it's the most sustainable, most reliable, and just the best use of our public dollars to ensure that we have high-speed, sustainable infrastructure and internet across the state. So the 3 types of applications are, the A1 is what we call them. Applications are, an ISP is committing to serve 100% of locations within that project area with fiber technology. The second is an A2. So that's, primarily serving fiber location, but excluding some outliers. And obviously we're all very familiar with the diverse topography in Arizona. So, realistically, with, in being good stewards of our public dollars, and really just for the sake of actual feasibility, we can't serve every single household in the state with fiber. So it is realistic to serve some of those locations with alternative technologies. And that's what the A2 application demonstrated. So priority fiber, and then excluding some outliers that are going to be served with alternative technology in round 2. The third application is our B applications, and we call them our non-priority applications. And those are just alternative technologies. So we're deferring those to round 2. We wanted to focus solely on fiber for round 1 and see how much we could serve with the superior technology as a part of the BEAD program. And here's what the numbers showed down here. So 44 project areas across the board in the state received applications. So of those 44 project areas, there's 170,000 total BEAD eligible locations. So that delta between, the 23 project areas that did not receive bids, only account for about 22,000 BEAD locations. And so with those 170 locations, I explained a little bit on what the difference between an A1 and A2 application is. 162,000 will receive fiber coverage across the state. So that's 84% of total BSLs will receive fiber based off of our round one applications. We're really proud of that number. That number is not final. So there is still a round two application where more providers can step up and still try to bid and provide fiber service to some of those remaining locations. But from our round one results alone, 84% of the locations in the state will be receiving fiber coverage. I will pause there. Steve, that's really all the presentation slides. I think it's more beneficial to have a dialogue. So I'll leave the slide up, but open to any questions, comments, and we can kind of get it going from here.
Sounds like a plan.
Hey,
Nick.
Steve.
Yeah, go ahead, Bob.
For our presentation by Nick, I may have missed it because I had pulled briefly away. If so, you can ignore this. But in our really outlying remote areas, we rely on what, a good wireless high-speed internet connection? Is that what we're looking for?
It could be. I mean, it could be fixed wireless. It could be satellite. But in those hard to reach locations where it's not either financially reasonable or just based off the geography alone reasonable, like we wouldn't be able to, or ISPs did not bid on serving those locations with fiber.
Well, yeah, my question's going in the direction of the population that we serve. So we got our own prejudice about this in a respectful way. But we've got youth that come here off of reservations and other outlying areas. And I'm always curious as to how well we can get out to those places. That's why I asked that question.
So, Vaughn, I'm not familiar with I'm sorry, I'm pretty new to the role. I'm not familiar with which areas you're specifically talking about.
We have the Toyota Nation, which is west of Tucson. It stretches from Tucson all the way to Ajo. And so when you get out a certain distance, then you have quite a remote area from there all the way to Ajo. And we have youth that come, about 25 or so youth that come to us from that reservation. And of course, their homes are out in that area where families live, et cetera. So I'm always curious about how well we can reach out to those areas. And then we've also got reservations in the central and northern part of Arizona that are somewhat similar in their, rural outlay area.
Yeah. So I'm going to be careful and not speak to specific areas yet. So for round two, we're going to release the public map right before round two opens. So you'll all be able to see on which geographical areas we're talking about with these locations. We can't do that yet until we kind of have some of these numbers finalized, but this is just based off of the application intake. But you will be able to see which locations that these are referencing right before round two opens in a couple of weeks. Okay.
Other questions for Nick?
There are a couple in the chat here. One is, can you share, I think you might have answered this, but can you share of the 44 project applications that were received, how many were tribal? Before you answer, Nick, I do want to remind everybody we are in the procurement window, which really, because we're especially about to open up that round two of applications, we are very limited in what we can share on like the specifics of things. So it's definitely more high level. But go ahead, Nick, on that one.
Yeah. Trying to think if I'll get in trouble for answering the numbers on this one. So
remember, we're recording.
Yeah. So here's what I'll say. We want more tribal intake in the BEAD program. And I think it's our job to make sure that, we are communicating the benefits of the program and engaging with tribes appropriately. So, we created different tribal project areas because tribes are unique, but the 21 tribes are unique as well. So, we're trying to develop a strategy to engage with each tribe on their own to ensure that, we can meet their needs, to ensure that they're also being able to take the opportunity to be a part of this program. So, whatever, I'm not going to share that number today, but what I will share is we need to do better. And that's something that our team is doing on the ground now, in preparation for round two to get more intake for tribal project areas and tribal lands.
So Nick, maybe this is for you and or Oksana about where are the tribes in terms of being receptive to being a part of this whole effort?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge that we're seeing, and a lot of it I can blame on NTIA confidently, but we have some part to do as well. So there are some significant financial requirements and burdens that are a part of the BEAD program. Like I said at the top, like these are significant infrastructure programs that do take a lot of capital and do have a lot of federal requirements to ensure that whichever applicant is applying and going to administer the funding, that they have the resources and capacity and bandwidth to do it. So I think it's more of some of the financial sharing of information. Tribes want to make sure that their data remains sovereign and not shared too widely. And unfortunately, just by the current nature of the BEAD program, based off of NOFO, some of that conflicts. And so that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges that we're seeing as a part of tribal intake for the program. Oksana, please weigh in if you have another perspective.
Thank you, Nick. No, I don't have another perspective, but I will echo what you and Kelly
Excuse me,
share.
Oksana, could you introduce yourself first, please?
Yes. Hi, good morning. I'm Oksana Beatty, Tribal Liaison for Arizona Commerce Authority. I will echo what Nick and Kelly did share regards to tribal. We are working with all 22, 21 tribes regards to BEAD in their unique, specific way that, that is needed. So yes, all communication to all tribes. Ongoing personal touch there as far as information and how we support them along the way. So just have that to add.
Okay.
There's a couple more in the chat. Sorry, I'm just going to take over and get these questions for BEAD. So the next one is from David Crassa. What's the threshold for financially feasible? And then there's one more after that.
I can take that one. So the process is, so NTIA will not review our applications. They don't go too far into the weeds in reviewing each individual application that the state of Arizona receive as a part of the BEAD program. So what happens is, we ultimately submit our package for our awardees as a part of our final proposal at the end of October. And as a part of that final proposal, we are attesting that we believe, as the state of Arizona, as the Arizona Commerce Authority, that each awardee has the capacity to administer this high dollar, high infrastructure program across the state. So, NTIA has released different questions that we should ask, in terms of bond capacity, line of credit, audit history, et cetera. So what the state needs to do is, in our best effort and what we're comfortable with certifying, that this applicant can meet all of those requirements and they have the financial capacity to do so. So ultimately, NTIA isn't getting involved with the process, but they're putting the onus on the state to ensure that we're signing off and we have that discretion and we're comfortable in certifying that the applicants do have that financial capacity. Does that answer that question?
Hey, this is David. I put in the question. I guess, so when you said financially feasible, that's because you have a fiber first approach. And so any alternative option is if fiber is not financially feasible, right? So if I'm looking at fiber for one home costing no less than $20,000 and I have a solution for $5,000, but it's not fiber, is that then financially feasible to do the alternative, or is the 20K for fiber still seen as the go-to? That's my question of where is that threshold?
Got it. So I'll answer this more on how we reviewed these applications. So like I said, we looked at each individual project area, and each project area was scored as a project area on its own. So the cost plus data showed on how much we provided for subsidy and the total cost for each project area. However, we did have to kind of look across the pot here. So, we have 925 million dollars in deployment dollars for the BEAD program. So, we need to make sure that we're spreading that and maximizing that to make sure that, we're getting the biggest, for lack of a better term, biggest bang for our buck from the BEAD program. So, we're looking at which applicants can put their best foot forward, and some applicants could come in at a different rate, above that 25% match, just because of the competitive nature of the project areas. And a lot of ISPs think that the cost of losing this money is greater than the benefit of winning it, because there's a sustainable business model in place, because they'll be able to charge consumers the rate for their service. So, that's how the businesses are kind of looking at this program as well. But in terms of the state, so, we obviously had this fiber priority. We think we put together a pretty good package based off of these dollars and these locations served, where, we can maximize coverage and maximize our dollars, but also, in hard to reach areas, those outliers that probably would not be able to receive fiber anyway, that we're going to also give them high-speed internet with a different model in round two.
Okay. Thanks, David. All right. So there's one more question in the chat, and then Michelle Simon's got one too.
I guess I just wanted to ask something. Are you confident that you have enough money left in round two to serve all these areas with alternative technologies? That's sort of follow up from David's question.
I do not want to share too much of our financial position just because we're going into competitive procurement in round two. But we are, yes.
Okay.
So Nick, did you perceive that ISPs who didn't apply for one or didn't get selected for one have been kind of just waiting for round two because it provides the opportunity for alternative technology?
Yes, we did see that. So, and just for everybody's awareness, our pre-registered applicants are publicly available on our website. So, you're all more than welcome to take a look on who is interested in the BEAD program. I can say that some of them did not apply for round one, and what my read on that is the pre-registration alone is a pretty lengthy process. So, if they're willing to go through that entire effort and get pre-registered and didn't apply for round one, then, well, one, our hope, but two, our expectation is that they are going to apply for round two.
Okay.
Okay. There is one more question in the chat that I'm going to get to, and then turn it over to Michelle. That last question in the chat is from Helen Costello. When bidded project areas are released, will the funding per project area also be released? So I think that means, correct me if I'm wrong, Nick, but I think what Helen is asking is, like, when we release that map by June 3rd of the areas that were picked up, no, financial information will not be released at that point.
So financial information won't be released, but there will be prorated project areas based off of locations that are available and left.
Is that financial information released? Like, is it all of it released in the final proposal? Like, is that when all details are shared? Or no, I'm asking because I do not know myself.
So yeah, our package as a part of the final proposal will show how much investment that we're
Okay,
making across the board.
perfect. Thank you. And then I'll turn it over to Michelle. She's got a question, I think, related to NEPA.
Thank you, Miss Kelly.
Of course.
Good morning. I'm Michelle Simon. I am the director of Pima County's Office of Digital Inclusion. We currently are implementing a enabling middle mile broadband infrastructure grant program where we're building about 140 miles of a contiguous open access net fiber optic ring around Pima County's urban core. And obviously, this is a federal broadband infrastructure program, and all of these infrastructure programs have significant requirements for NEPA and NHPA. Now, some things have come out from CEQ about for BEAD projects not having to worry about certain things related to NEPA, but that same direction has not been given when it comes to NHPA. But with federal budget proposals and the way that they're working through things, the Historic Preservation Fund looks to be unfunded, and that is what funds our State Historic Preservation Office and our Tribal Historic Preservation Offices, which are required entities in order to implement the requirements of the National Historic Preservation Act. So there's a lot of things happening. What I'd like to know is really, are these things on your radar, and what kinds of things are you all looking at in order to mitigate the issue should something occur? And, you know, it's significant for Pima County in that we are right in the middle of creating a programmatic agreement that will require the sign off of both the SHPO and the TIPO. And um, and that timing won't be until about September. And at this point, our local offices are only funded through July 31st. So lots of things happening, but it impacts not only my project, but future BEAD projects as well.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle, and good to hear from you again. Yeah, I think that is kind of a common theme of what we're trying to comprehend, I guess, at the state broadband office, and just on what types of federal changes are going to happen. I mean, a lot of this certainly seems unprecedented, but with every change in administration, there's obviously going to be some types of changes. Um, you know, Proactively, what I'll say is, so we're in pretty close coordination right now with all of our permitting agencies, but especially SHPO, to making sure that we can administer. Well, there's not going to be any broadband projects unless we can permit them efficiently and effectively. So we've set up like a state agency interworking group over the last year to ensure that all of the state agencies know the volume of permits that are going to be coming in as a part of the BEAD program. In terms of the budget specifically, I don't know if I really have any comments yet. I mean, it's pretty new information. We'll be adaptable once it comes along, and we're going to start working with ISPs pretty soon once we know which ones that we're going to preliminary award, so they're prepared for any types of requirements that could come along as well. But as far as I can tell right now, we don't have any funding that could backfill or support, and if we do, it would just be one time and wouldn't really address the issue at large. But we're in close communication with our fellow state agencies to ensure that we can administer the program efficiently on that regard as well.
Well, and I'd like to just follow up with that. Like, so what would be the best route for advocacy efforts in this way with not only the governor's office but our legislature? Because the unfunding of the SHPO and the TIPO don't just impact broadband projects. It impacts all federal infrastructure projects. So, best course of action? How do we have those conversations? Is there a right way or a wrong way to do that, I guess is what I'm throwing out there.
Sure. So I think the governor's office could be a good step. I mean, I would start with the congressional delegation if they're the ones having the conversation on the funding cuts specifically. I don't know what the appetite is for the state to backfill federal money right now. I mean, there's a lot of different discussions on what that could mean. I mean, I'm not going to step out too much in my lanes, but I know there's Medicaid conversations, there's different transportation, like there's all these different, federal policies that are in loom right now. So, the governor's office has to, kind of assess their priorities as well. But in terms of advocacy, I think that the best place is probably the congressional delegation.
Awesome. I appreciate that. Thank you.
So just Nick, FYI, I'm hoping to have somebody from Representative Siscomani's office sometime in the next few weeks to come and talk to us about. We've had updates from Mark Kelly's office, but we kind of know where he is, but haven't heard from Siscomani. But to pick up on Michelle's question about what advocacy, I know some states have already been in communication with their delegations about BEAD and basically saying, don't make all these changes. They're going to require us to redo all our plans and delay for a year and all that kind of stuff. I don't know if you can or want to comment on what Arizona is or is not doing from that perspective.
Yes, we are scratching all surfaces.
Okay.
There's I'm sorry, I keep chiming in here, but 2 more questions in the chat, and we need to jump in about 8 minutes to get to a 9 a.m. and I'm sure a lot of people do. So 2 more questions. One from Vaughn Croft. Nick, after all the installs, does the funding proposal and those granted have service allocations included to keep the system working?
Vaughn, I want to make sure I'm understanding your question.
Yeah, servicing all that equipment after once it's installed is always my question. Does that fall on the responsibility of the whatever local agency then? How is that service going forward?
Yes. So whoever the awardee, so we only have the upfront infrastructure money. So that's the commitment that the applicant will make to sustain it.
Because sometimes it may not be this project. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to be a negative saysayer, but I know in other kinds of projects, sometimes these projects lay a burden on the local responsible entity. They can't go forward with the maintenance and the service, and if there's breakdown, repair, and things like that.
I think that's kind of the purpose of some of the NTIA questions on audit history, track record, capacity. Have you done these types of infrastructure projects before, to kind of root out some of that? It's not bulletproof, but we're hoping that one of our priorities was making sure that we have reliable providers that we're going to be awarding, and we think our application process did that. So we're hoping that we don't have that issue in the future.
Okay, any other quick questions for Nick? He has to take off for another meeting.
One more in the chat from
Probably
Henry.
do all day.
This one from Henry is, have applicants gotten approval for permitting? Oh, wait, sorry, I've skipped Mark's. Mark's was, any expectation or concern that NTIA in pending guidance caps the state's high cost threshold? And if so, how might that affect round 1?
God, I hope not, is my answer that I've been going with for these. If we had to reduce any type of solicitation process, that's obviously going to be pretty inefficient and delay the program. I could say even up to a year, but I don't think we're going to have that issue.
We hope
Okay.
not.
And then from Henry, have applicants gotten approval for permitting for deploying fiber, for example, on utility poles?
So for the BEAD program specifically, is the question asking?
Sorry, I was scrolling back up. Have applicants got approval for, I'm Yes, Henry, chime in. I'm assuming that is BEAD related.
Yeah, it's BEAD related. I'm asking about the whole permitting issue. If applicants are deploying fiber, say on utility poles, they have to get the approval of the utilities for doing that, getting the permits approved for deploying fiber in the BEAD program. Do they do that in their applications? Have they already done that, or is it a
No. So they won't start so we're encouraging applicants to apply for permits early to, make sure that there's no delays in that process. And then once we're awarded, they can start construction right away. Now, ultimately, we can't give an award isn't final until NTIA approves our final proposal, which is likely 3 to 4 months after we submit our final proposal in October. So we're looking probably at early 2026. So it would be up to the business practice of the ISP whether they want to start permitting early and now. From our perspective, yes, but I don't know if that makes the most sense from the business perspective.
Yeah, well, what confuses me about it is they don't know how much the utilities are going to charge them to deploy the fiber on their utility poles because they might need to, refurbish the poles or replace them. So doesn't that add a lot of uncertainty to what the cost would be of deploying the fiber in these areas if they don't know how much it's going to cost to deploy it on these poles?
It could add a cost, but what I'll say is it's not going to be a cost to the taxpayers or the BEAD allocation. So we're having those BEAD dollars, that number that they're going to be awarded is based off of what they applied for in round one. So anything after that, we're assuming that they had all of that spec'd out ahead of time. And most of these ISPs do have a footprint across the state. So, have probably had these conversations or have a precedent to doing things like this. So we're hoping that we don't have any curveballs, but, Henry, as you know, with any infrastructure project, there always is something.
Yeah, the bidders should know that average cost and factor that in.
So they're responsible for any overruns, is what we're saying, if it costs more than what they expect.
Yes.
So Kelly, I don't know if you guys have a couple more minutes. I know Mala's got some questions or comments.
No, I was just commenting on what everyone else was writing, especially Juan and David. I just got off at YouTube, live call that the senators had about. It was a pre-vote to the hotspot lending program through the E-rate funding. So today it's going to be voted on. So I'm really curious to see what the results of the vote is going to be. This is a CRA vote. A CRA vote means once it is denied, it can never be taken up again. So we're just keeping our fingers crossed that through that it does not pass through CRA, and we can always take it up with FCC to reform it or make changes to the program. But once it goes through the CRA, that's the Congressional Review Act, then it cannot be reversed. So I put the YouTube link. It's over, but you can still go and look at it, and you can. It's about 26 minutes of live conversation in front of the Capitol building, the U.S. Capitol building, not our Arizona Capitol. And it's really interesting. It's really interesting to see what how the senators are viewing it, especially those that are supporting it. So take time if you can to look at it today, and keep your fingers crossed that it doesn't pass through CRA. That's all I can say, because this will eliminate the hotspot access to students who rely on them for homework, college prep, virtual learning. It will also prevent libraries and schools from distributing Wi-Fi hotspots through the E-rate program. Of course, AZ Strut does it, and you have a $30, I think $30, $35 charge on a hotspot per month. You can borrow it from AZ Strut, but again, people on the outlying areas, that's who we're talking about. That's who needs it most, are going to be the ones that are going to suffer a lot more. Telehealth and applying for business, you know, projects, and all of those are going to suffer if you're not going to allow lending of hotspots through the E-rate program. So back to you, Steve, unless there are questions.
Okay. So I'm not sure whose feedback we're getting here. Maybe it's mine. So Nick, thank you for being here. Just one last question about advocacy. So I asked you about what the state is doing. Is there something we should all be doing in contacting our congressional delegation? Do you have any sense at this point? As I said, I think we know where Mark Kelly is on all this stuff, but we don't really know about where the other congressional delegation is. Do you have any sense, or can you comment on that at all?
Sure. I would say that, any vehicle that you have for advocacy, utilize it. I think the more voices, the better. I think be creative with it. As the state and as the Commerce Authority who's administering the program, a lot of times our advocacy doesn't make a lot of sense. We have to have an objective approach. We're getting $1 billion from the federal government, whoever that federal government may be. So, it's our responsibility to administer it how the rules are written. So, our advocacy isn't on, you should not change these types of rules or you should leave these ones. It's more of, we have good results here. Let the state keep going forward, and the state knows the state the best. But I think you all have you've done advocacy. You have priorities that your areas of the state are in most need of, and I would utilize those real stories and those real people stories to anybody who has an ear, that could help the decision makers on this. But what I have learned is when we kind of get lost in different types of technology or even cost, it doesn't really have that impact on what the everyday Arizonan actually is facing. So that would be my recommendation or food for thought there. But I know you all are pretty big advocates in the space, and you know the need here. So we appreciate your support in any way that you can.
I think part of my question, Nick, was we want to be in sync with what other communication through the governor's office, or I don't think you guys directly are advocating, but I assume the governor's office may, at least I'm thinking that the governor's office has been in communication, and we just want to make sure we're in sync with other communication coming from, particularly quote, official communication coming from the state.
Yeah, I can't speak to too much what the governor's office is doing anymore. I'm sure that anything that you would say would probably be aligned.
Okay, thank you. So I know you got to run. Thank you, Nick, for being here. Great, really appreciate you being here and answering all the questions. And again, well, next week everything could change, but
yeah, right. We'll have a new slide deck next week.
But thank you for being here and being candid, and it was really helpful to really get a sense. And again, I want to thank Kelly and Aaron for being here on a regular basis and keeping us up to date on what's going on. So I appreciate that. And Kelly, you need to leave too?
Yes,
Okay.
I'm going to jump
Okay.
too. Thank you, Steve. Thanks,
Thank you,
everyone.
guys. Bye now.
Thanks, Steve.
So let's jump on with a couple of other things. Mala, you want to give us an update on what's happening and what's happening in Washington right now?
I think I just did. I'm waiting. I'm waiting and watching to see what's going to happen with the CRA because that would be really disappointing if it passed. It already passed the Senate 53-47 on a procedural vote yesterday and day before, and today is going to be the final vote on whether this is going to be hotspots are going to be taken out of E-rate or are going to be allowed to stay. So let's see. We've had more than 1,000 applications um, nationwide and for over 200,000 hotspots this year alone. But of course, it will not be funded until all this gets resolved, and also uh, it is funded only after priority one and category one and category two are funded. So that means it'll be funded only after all of the internet applications as well as all of the internal connection applications. Uh, and that's not worrisome because I know that the total applications for category one and two total only about 67% of the amount available. So there's lots of money left if this goes through. If the CRA does not pass, then we are in good shape to fund all of them. And this is necessary until at least until the BEAD program is absolutely completed, not just awarded but completed, because the hotspots are an interim for those who lack broadband at home, either in the rural areas or in the urban areas, or they need it on the go. So hotspots would be the best alternative. So let's wait and see what's going to happen.
Thanks, Mala. So Heather, if I can put you on the spot, I know you follow a lot of what's happening in Washington and stuff. Do you have anything that you want to add to what's already been discussed today?
I was just in Washington last week speaking to our delegation. I didn't talk to them about BEAD because for us and NTCA, the Rural Broadband Association I was working with, USF is our major issue. A lot of our delegation is on board. Kelly's office is leading on that charge. Cecil Mani's office is very on board with that as well. Stanton's office is on board. We do have a lot of new legislators in our delegation. So what I tend to do is send them a USF 101 as a follow-up and let them know what other people in our delegation are on board with it if they need further resources. So for us, USF has been the focus. I guess we have full confidence that BEAD will work itself out, even if it just takes a smidge longer.
Okay, thank you. Any questions for Heather? So Brian Daly, if I can put you on the spot, and Bill, are you still here? Looks like Bill's gone. But Brian, do you want to talk anything about, there's a lot of discussion going on about spectrum.
Yeah, I mean, it's still in process. Obviously, the biggest issue is giving the FCC the auction authority back, which is, still a priority, I believe, by the administration. But I think, we need to have that auction authority in order to allow the FCC to auction off spectrum. There's a lot of other discussion on different bands that are continued discussion within the commission, and obviously spectrum is top priority.
So you were talking about different bands. So part of that is military versus public versus. Can you talk about that just a little bit, please?
Yeah, there's a lot of obviously in the what I'll call it the good spectrum, which is good for both wireless coverage as well as capacity. A lot of those frequency bands are covered by military use at present. So there's discussion on how to share spectrum with military users. A lot of those systems in those frequency bands are military radar systems, so it may be possible to develop technologies that will allow wireless systems to share with those radar systems. So there's a lot of discussion with that on what can be shared, what frequency bands can be shared, and obviously technologies will have to be developed in order to support that.
Thanks, Brian. So Lucy, you want to give us an update on what's happening with our healthcare initiative?
I just put a link in the chat. As a reminder, we are hosting a health and education task force as it relates to this whole issue of broadband. And we are meeting bi-weekly on Thursdays. And so today is the third session at 3 o'clock. So we have continued to identify specific objectives and priorities based on those who show up, and encourage anybody to pop in and participate if you'd like. Thanks to Gordon Fuller, who joined us for the first time last week, because his presence and his expertise in the disability space and his perception of just to be able to be that strong voice at the table has allowed us to go ahead and add a fifth objective to the task force. So we are looking at number one, as per Heather, trying to come up with a successful, replicable rural program that makes sense. Number two, we are, as of Mala, trying to figure out how to actually put in place a replicable telehealth hub at the libraries based on the last projects and based on the barriers. My priority is to help amplify the voice of this whole issue by possibly launching a new broadcast with some key members. And those are some of the high-level issues. Let me just see if I missed one. Develop a replicable rural AZ success story, create a path of sustainability for the healthy taps, that's the library, launch a new monthly broadcast by May, and to increase the direct statewide network. So adding the developmental focus is huge. So thank you, Gordon, for showing up. And sometimes a small but mighty group can be a little bit more task oriented and move the ball forward. So, but it is open. And that link right there on the bottom has a rolling deck that's attached to it. So we're trying to be very transparent. And so we're just putting the notes and the agendas on the end of that deck as we go. So you can click in the Zoom, which is in that link on the calendar item, not join and just listen to the Zoom. Number two, you can go ahead and join the Force for Health for free so that you can get access to the virtual boardroom and participate in the notes and have access to the tools. Or three, you can take advantage of a complimentary $99 group leader membership with a code that I'll put in the chat also, so that you can kind of play a little bit more and have access to all the tools. But looking forward to it. We've had a lot of discussions. It's almost kind of forced to me to make sure that I come up with value that I am excited to report against coming up. So it just does not turn into this, oh gosh, what are we going to talk about? No, we have a very specific focus. So we're hyper focusing on the partnerships and establishing who wants to work together, especially with the timing of the grant.
But Lucy, I'm sorry, but I can't be there today. I have another conflicting meeting. So
no worries. They're always recorded and they're always consumable, on the treadmill later on.
And I want to remind you that you can download the chat. As you know, I always send it out, but it's probably going to be tomorrow or Monday before I get that information out. In the meantime, if you go to chat, and at the very top, you'll see 3 ellipses, and you can download the chat. And then all the links that Lucy mentioned are available to you. Because once we end the meeting, then you can't access that. And so I just want to remind you, if you want to be able to connect, that you need to make sure you have those links. Okay, so just a couple of other things. just a reminder that net inclusion is coming up pretty darn quick, 22nd, and also that Kelly, you want to just talk quickly about the Super Day on the 19th?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Kelly Mukherjee from ASU's Enterprise Technology. I am also a board member of the Arizona Digital Inclusion Network. And so AIDN, the organization, is having a super AIDN meeting on the 19th. It's the day before the Net Inclusion Conference, and all of you are welcome. So if you need more information on the times, I think it's 2 to 3 hours long. We do have a flyer out. And I think Cindy Hogan has even sent out a registration form to try to get information. But really, we want to invite all of you in Arizona to come together and just have deeper discussions about how to work together and how to help advance the work as one. Thanks, Steve.
And if you haven't signed up already for the conference, please do so. This is a great opportunity to have this national conference with broad representation from all over the world, not just all over the country. It's a great thing for Arizona. And so I really encourage you, if you haven't registered, it's not too late. You're going to pay late fees, but you definitely should try to attend the conference. So we'll have good representation. Okay, any other announcements that people have before we end for today?
Steve?
Yeah, go ahead, Heather.
Do we want to just let the group know that bill, Senate Bill 1322 did pass and is going to the governor's desk to move the Arizona Broadband Office from the ACA to the, what is it, the Agency on Administration?
Yeah, yeah, thank you very much, Heather. So,
Uh-huh.
Heather, do you and Mark want to just talk a little more about that? It's important.
Sure.
Reminding me.
ATIC Executive Committee did take a considered opinion against the bill. John Kelly testified in hearings. He's now been authorized to draft a letter to the governor to encourage her veto of it. And in fact, I've been led to believe by informed sources that that veto is extremely likely. But that's where we stand. ATIC will be issuing a letter shortly to the governor as follow-up to the work we've already begun on that.
So do you guys just want to explain just a little bit more about exactly what's happening here with that?
Sure. This would transfer the Arizona Broadband Office from the Arizona Department of Commerce, which is not a state agency, but a quasi-public-private agency. It used to be the Arizona Department of Commerce long ago, but we followed a Florida model and broke it out. It would put it back under state control, under ADOA, the Department of Administration. There had been some um, support for that more from a public safety community, thinking that the state would better um, look out for public safety concerns in BEAD and other programs, but that's not really what BEAD is all about. It is for residential broadband serviceable locations, community anchor institutions, kind of secondarily, and those do include then public safety entities. So it would put the broadband office back under direct state agency control, which most of us, I don't want to speak for all, view as less likely to be oriented towards economic development and broad consumer adoption than the ACA's leadership of it is likely to result in.
Okay, thank you, Mark. So obviously we're concerned for a variety of reasons about that move, one of which is if that moves, then the broadband manager moves and the whole BEAD program would move, and it would just create a whole lot of chaos and delay and all kinds of stuff. So,
well, yes, and all the current contracts with consultants, contractors, vendors to the ACA would basically have to be redone if they were now contracts not with the a public-private agency, but with a direct state agency. And so we do see, if that were to happen, multiple reasons why it would be negatively impacting the progress that has been made.
Thanks. Michael Kendall, you have anything from DOE that you want to share?
Hi, Steve. Yeah, this is Michael Kendall. I'm the broadband coordinator with Arizona Department of Education. Things have been relatively quiet the last couple of weeks, Steve. We just continue to monitor, our focus being on the special construction. And we have about 8 projects currently in flight now. We meet routinely with the general contractor, carrier, broadband, E-rate consultants. But other than tracking those projects in flight, I really have nothing new to not much new to share, Steve.
Okay, thank you, Michael. Okay, anybody have anything else before we end for today? Going once, going twice. So I'm going to end recording.